Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. I have a special guest. It's Hudson Byblow, and he is a Catholic speaker. He has a CD on Lighthouse Media that I encourage you to check out. And today, the topic on finding our Father is going to be the transgender issue. Thank you for joining me, Hudson. Thank you.
Total pleasure, Joseph. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're the second Canadian that I've only done 3 shows, but you're the second Canadian because Patrick Coffin lives in the United States, but he's also born in Canada.
Yeah, that's awesome. Canada is producing good Catholic people. I hope we can say that.
I would say so. And then the topic of my discussion with Patrick was another Canadian, Jordan Peterson. So we've had a lot of Canadian stuff. And I wanted to introduce the topic. I was trying to think of how to introduce the transgender topic. I'm older than you, so my generation has a little bit of a different take on it. I mean, I remember it's difficult to get your head wrapped around the terminology. So I was not familiar with the term transgender at all, like when I was in the gay community. I don't remember at all. I remember transsexuals, and then there was also transvestism. So this was my understanding, let's say back in the 80s and the 90s when I was in the LGBT community. A transsexual was someone who had a surgical operation in order to transition from one sex to another, typically from male to female. And I knew people who were transsexual. Transvestism was a different, that you don't hear at all anymore. That was like female impersonators, like like what we would think of now as like a drag queen, somebody who did not have any surgical augmentation, but dressed as a woman, is a man and dressed like a woman, either as a form of recreation or as an entertainer or something like that. But but they didn't necessarily live as a woman. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. And then I just wanted to throw this out here too. I like, because I'm trained in history, I like outlines. So like as a kid, I remember like the Marilyn Monroe movie, Some Like It Hot, with Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon. That was, probably one of the first instances in pop culture of transvestism, where you see men, dressed as women. Then you had like Milton Berle, who was he was a TV personality, and he would dress. But this was all very much in the sphere of like camp. This wasn't like a lifestyle or an identity. This is all camp. And then in the 1950s, you had a famous transsexual, Christine Jorgensen, and she was really the first American, or the first famous American, to go through. I know. See that this is now we're getting into the lexicons again. So they call it. It's called gender affirming surgery. Back then, I think it was just called. Or what was it? Then it was called gender reassignment surgery.
Yeah.
Okay. So now it's called gender affirming. And then in the 70s, you had somebody like Jack Tripper and Three's a Company, who was like transvestism. It was very camp again. But then in the 80s, this is where things get more interesting. You have someone like Boy George, who was dressing from Culture Club, who was dressing like a woman full time, but was not a transsexual. And then there was I remember a famous model in the 80s and 90s. Her name was Tula, and she was a transsexual. And she was actually the first, now they say the first transgender. She was the first transgender person to pose for Playboy magazine. So then, you saw a difference. And when I was in the LGBT community back in the 90s, like I said, I knew people who were transsexual and they had a different name. Let's say they went, from a male name to a female name. I remember, um, um, well, anyway, but like I've used some people might be annoyed, but I've used the pronoun she because I, that's just the way I referred to people that had had surgery to as a transsexual to go from one gender to the other. Where it's gotten funny is now that or not funny, but where it's gotten confusing even for me, sorry, is that like when I've returned to the LGBT community as a missionary, I've seen people who are like, I would say gender fluid. Like one of the things that really shocked me when I went back to San Francisco as a missionary is specifically like the Pride Parade or the Folsom Parade, the Folsom Street Fair, is that I saw trans men who, who are shirtless, and I could tell had a double mastectomy, and I had never ever seen anything like that when I was a gay guy. Like I said, I knew male to female transsexuals, and for all intents and purposes, I mean, they then looked like a female. But then we have this weird situation now of, I guess, of transgenderism. But that's been, and I'll let you unpack all this. But then okay, try. But I mean, then this transgender term is like all encompassing. So it's covering like a lot of times drag queens or people who are transsexuals who have had gender reassignment surgery. So then it's also involving these people that are like gender fluid, where they're claiming one identity, but they still really have the appearance of the opposite identity, if you know
Right.
what I'm saying.
Yeah,
So that's where it's confusing. So if you want to try to unpack a little bit of that, go ahead.
I'll try and unpack it a little
Okay.
bit.
Okay.
What I experienced. First
I'm
of all, like
listening.
the language thing obviously is so important. And that the meaning of gender, like if someone tries to explain transgender without looking at the word gender, then there's going to be missing pieces of the puzzle, right? And gender used to be something that was distinct from sex, but not disconnected. You know what I mean? Like sex and gender are not identical, but it's not like gender is just something that is dependent on your mindset. Do you know what I'm saying? Like there's biological realities about you
Right.
and about me that are inescapable in terms of even how our brains work and how they're conditioned or what they might be more likely. And I'm not saying there's like a male brain and a female brain, but if you had like on the aggregate and stuff like I'm not a scientist, I'm not going to go into the science, but there's differences between men and women, and everybody knows that it manifests in a billion ways. So the gender is not disconnected from sex. So transgender, I'm looking at trans and saying like, well, transitioning, meaning like I'm apart from what society says I ought to be. And so that requires some perspective of what a person thinks society thinks they should be.
Okay.
To me, the overarching umbrella is like there are people growing up in a society who have been told that if you really are a girl, this is what that means. You fit here. But if you don't fit there, or if you don't feel like you're very good in that box or that set of expectations, then maybe being a girl is not for you. Or for a boy, like, well, being a boy means this.
Okay.
But if you really feel up to speed on that, then maybe being a boy is not for you. And Joseph, I've seen numerous YouTube videos from activists who they're aimed to children, and they'll talk to the camera and say, if you've ever felt like you're questioning yourself, period. Like every human being comes a point in time where they question themselves when they're growing up, not sexually necessarily, but like, do I fit in? Do I measure up to the others? Do I like what I interpret to be boyish things? there's always questions. People, but they say like if the question merely exists, then it actually means you are trans, and that's the message that a lot of young people are getting into. On top of that, you have things like the more and more people do that and celebrate it, it becomes more of a viable option to be happy. And I truly think that everybody who's going down that road, as I did, is simply trying to find happiness, but they're finding it in the ways that the only ways that they know how. That's the truth for every human being. You know what I mean? But it just happens to be that they've been fed these options, whereas 30 years ago, those options weren't on the table. It's sort of like the thing of the time today,
I want to make a couple of statements, and I want you to help me out. Now, that introduction that I had, that sort of rambling introduction I had, I guess what I was trying to formulate or articulate is that, I mean, one conclusion that I have is that now gender, male, female, has been sort of untethered from equipment. So what I mean by that is, let's say like in the 80s and the 90s, when I was in the LGBT community, and this was just my perception. I'm not saying that this was an all encompassing, way of thinking about it. But in terms of a transsexual person going from male to female, for example, if they had had surgery, then it was sort of, in my mind, it was made sense that now equipment matched what their identity is, okay? In a superficial way. I know that's not real, or not, sort of fully functional. Of course, a transsexual woman cannot bear children. But now it's been completely unmoored even from that, where somebody can claim to be a transgender woman and still have the equipment of a man. So it's not just that transgenderism has been untethered from XX and XY, or from a change of equipment, but it's really untethered from everything. Okay.
I really love the word untethered, because
Okay.
that makes a lot of sense. As far as I can tell,
You get what I'm
it's connected entirely to how a person thinks of themselves, entirely. And so to me, that points to the idea that how people's mindsets are formed really matters. How people's mindsets are formed. I don't even want to talk about identity, because that might be, but I still can talk about ways of thinking and mindsets. And so many things impact what a child, how they'll be formed or influenced in ways of thinking about themselves and others, and how they ought to fit into this world. And it just so happens to be that things have edged forward in this way, where feelings, not the feelings. I'm saying like what a person thinks they are is enough to kind of allow them to give them permission to take it on to a whole new level, and for some cases lash out against those who won't accept that. I just was reading a few posts about family members who've been cut out of the lives of their children because their children, like, no matter what they do, it's not enough. It's not enough for, so that I understand that in some cases there's a lot of wounding, underneath, and some, not all. But they're like, why would someone cut out their own parents unless there was some sort of relational breakdown,
Yeah, I mean, that happens in the gay situation as well. You mentioned, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds quite yet, but sorry, but because before you mentioned a male and female brain, and I think that is true, because I mean, testosterone and estrogen have a lot of influence on everything in the body. And see, and one of the arguments that I've seen, like in the transgender community, is like for instance, let's stick to trans women. I better clarify this because people are going to be confused, because I was initially quite confused over this too. When I say like a trans woman, I am talking about someone who, as they would say, was assigned male at birth, but is transitioning to woman. And when you say trans man, that's the opposite. That's confusing for people. So a trans woman, I have heard people give their testimony, say they said, well, I felt like I was born with a female brain, but a male body.
But I, we only have the only brain we've ever had, right? So it's not possible. It's not possible to have experienced life with a different brain. And whenever I hear things like that, it's like, well, I feel like I was born with, like, it's like all that's happening there is you're living the only life you've ever known how to live. And that was true with me. It was true with you. It's true with everybody who's just trying to find their way. But how that, like, I really think the bigger question is, what made them think that? Or a good question. What makes someone think that they're gay because they, or trans? Okay, let's talk about trans. What makes someone think that they're trans? Is it because they, like in my case, I wasn't good at boy things? When I was little, I had this mindset. My conclusion with my brain.
Conversely, you were also attracted more to, let's say, more typically female.
Yeah, but
endeavors.
But why did I believe that the things that I was attracted to were girly things? Was it because the things that were boyish I always saw boys doing? So like what I'm saying is my expectations were formed by all sorts of things too.
Right.
Until I was able to like challenge those things and say like, oh yeah, wanting to distance myself from total jerks who were boys didn't mean that I was supposed to be a girl. It just meant that for whatever reason I didn't feel like it was a safe place to be.
Feel free not to answer, but I never had any transgender inclinations, but of course, a very strong homosexual, and this is from 20 years of therapy. I can see that my swerve towards, now I'm going to ask you this question, that my swerve towards homosexuality was trauma based. Do you think that's also an issue with the swerve towards transgenderism?
Well, I could never make.
Sorry, I mean, you mentioned experience some hostility from male peers. So that's in a certain cases a trauma. So can that swerve someone towards transgenderism?
I think it can swerve someone to be repelled from an environment where they feel that they will be unsuccessful.
Right.
And as an after effect, where else do you go? Well, you go to the other group of kids. Happened to be that was a bunch of girls, and then you become schooled in the way of girl. So that was a
lot of gay guys have that story too. I mean, I did.
Oh yeah. Well, it's just the same thing. Like, just because you have a casino, not everyone's going to become a gambling addict, right? But every gambling addict goes to the casino, right? Like, it's like one of those things.
Right.
So I want to say, like, of course, not all, but I'm not the only person with my story, and having my expectations formed about from my life experience about where I would feel wanted, where I would feel safe, where I would feel like I had some chance of success in being a person. And like, yeah, one of the things was like, well, if I clearly don't fit in with the guys, I'll never, be able, like, I see these guys on a pedestal because this isn't me. Sorry, that light back there is like maybe there's the question, well, maybe I was supposed to be a girl, and that's on top of having, like, some people would say, well, that's not transgender, that's just something else. It's like, well, no, I remember some of my earliest memories dreaming that I should be a girl. I mean, those are all there, but the idea of like really entertaining the thought and saying, maybe that is for me. Maybe I'm supposed to belong with the boys because I'm in the fashion of being a girl, because I didn't feel like I belonged with the boys, like the wolf pack,
Right.
So
I felt that too. Yeah. This kind of confirms a lot of what I mean. I've come to understand about the LGBT community. People, and I repeat this over and over again. Um, Homosexuality is quite rare in men. It's only about 2%. And I know some people think it's 10. Now transgenderism is even rarer. So, I mean, because something you said really struck me, and you said, "Well, I must be a girl, or I should be a girl." That I think, in a lot of way, is a way for a child, especially, to make sense of things. Like for
yeah,
me, it was like, okay, when I could comprehend what gay was, when I was very little, I couldn't. But when I got a little older, maybe about 11 or 12, then in my mind, I could say, okay, I'm gay. That makes a lot of sense, why things happen a certain way, why I'm not getting along with boys, why this, why that, why that. It's kind of like, okay. And I could see some and even fewer young men who have gone through some kind of trauma. I must be a girl. And then that would make everything would make sense
yeah. Well,
in your
it's funny.
head.
It's funny because not haha funny, but it's interesting that every other facet of reality, it seems to be acceptable to explore the idea of like, why am I the way I am? But not on this topic, you know? And like I'm sure I've told you before, but like the first person, because I know God can use anybody, the first person to actually like, you know, uh, really launched me down the path of like saying like of me thinking like why am I the way I am. It was actually an LGBTQ activist, a very hardline activist who actually writes policy that is clamping down on Christianity. But he's the one who said environment plays a factor in the development of your attractions.
Right.
Now, if that's before, that's like I wasn't even thinking trans. I was just thinking on that topic at the time. But like if that doesn't make a person start to wonder about all of the things they've been told, like what could, you know what I mean? And it's like, so that journey of self-examination was very important. And I mean, for years and years and years of thinking about this, I like, it boils, as far as I'm concerned, like so much of it boils right back down to expectations. And it's who is, why was my thinking formed the way it was such that I arrived at particular conclusions, who was guiding those thoughts, who is guiding the thoughts of the children now, with guiding them how to think about things. And the other thing, so you said, a lot of people have said this, that transgenderism is very rare. I actually think that we ought to rethink that, because more and more and more and more kids are being convinced by many activists online who are saying if you question, it means you're trans, that like it's an explosive number and it will keep getting bigger. And then as sexual and romantic exploration comes into play, as every kid who's ever felt unwanted knows, as soon as you're wanted, like let's say you've entered into a romantic thing, that means a lot. And that's going to affirm you in thinking about yourself in a particular way, and it's going to feel good. And you're not going to want to let it go. And so if that comes through a same-sex or a transgender encounter or whatever, or you're in that persona or state of being or whatever, or that's who you are at the time, it'll be harder to let go of that and think beyond that, because it has fed the deepest need of humanity, which is to be loved and to be
Right.
chosen, and to be wanted and to feel special. And that's what I worry about. The young people who are being encouraged to sexually and romantically explore. First of all, there's a deep lack of understanding of friendship, because of the digital age. They don't know how to, young people have struggled to relate to one another a lot more than the pre-internet age. And so a romantic or a sexual encounter is all the more powerful because it's such a contrast from a state of being where there's a longing for friendship that's not met. Like holy friendship is another facet of the conversation that I wish could be talked about,
Okay. I'm gonna. You're ahead of me, but I want to be go back. It
All
is
right.
something. No. Something that I have difficulty navigating. And what really made me think of it is you're saying, well, more people than we may think might identify as transgender. But and I try to be sensitive to this when I outreach, because part of outreaching is to have a conversation with someone, and you don't have a conversation with someone if you make them feel uncomfortable right away. So I try to be sensitive. And I have talked to young people who say they're transgender, but to me, they are outwardly cisgender. I mean, which cisgender means you identify as the gender that you were born with. So if you are born female, then you would, look female and identify as female. So I have talked to young people who say they're transgender, but for me, like I said, it's very difficult to navigate, because I'm
Yeah.
thinking, okay, this person was born female, looks female. I don't understand where is the transgender? Where is that?
It,
I don't even know if you can address that, because it's
well, I
so
think it's the idea of the transgenderism is apart from how you physically come across, right? Like it's it's how you are. It's how your sense of being. Like it's if a, that's all I would say about it.
okay.
It's just because someone's not wearing this or that, you can't make a call. Like anybody on the street who looks like a man or a woman could literally, be invested in the
Right,
transgender.
right, right. And I'm not putting anybody down. This what makes me wonder if this is not something that is it's almost like media driven. Do these young people really are they really identifying as transgender, or is it something fashionable to do at the time? Because I guess, uh, just from my background, when I saw people in the 80s and 90s, to me it seemed like they were very invested in being another gender. I mean, they went through surgeries, they went through facial feminization surgeries, hair removal. I mean, it was a big investment in terms of time, physical suffering, money, in order, what they would say is, just to pass as the other sex. But here I see somebody saying they're transgender, and I don't see it. I don't see the outward manifestation. And that makes me wonder, what is this?
We have to, I guess, respect that if that's where someone is in their mindset, then that's where they are. That's the big idea, right?
This is an anecdote, but I remember I was at Pride a few years ago, and I was talking to a group of young ladies, and they were acting like kind of like they were maybe lesbians. And I was acting in a certain way, very like Katy Perry, very I kissed a girl, and I was like, and we were talking about to them, and then a group of very well-built guys walked by, and they all like their chins hit the floor, and I was like, oh, are you guys, are you really lesbian? And they're like, no, we're not. So it was like they were putting on, it was like a performance. So I wonder at what
Well,
point.
what about this, Joseph? What about the factor that some people are fueling simply passions of the flesh? Where they desire and continue to desire, let's say, romantic or sexual exploits or conquests, and then that can branch out into everything. I mean, I've talked to lots of people who have felt like the next edge for them in the sexual realm, the next checkbox is to go have sex with a transgender person.
Really?
Transgender,
Okay.
you know what I mean? It's like, well, it's the next forbidden fruit, right? But what I'm saying is that um, the desire to continuously fulfill the need to, it's not fulfill the need, to pursue the passions of the flesh,
Okay.
like just like that is an unquenchable desire, right? It doesn't go away, it just gets strengthened. So the more that people are in that sort of pattern, whoever they are, there's always, once you get bored of the high, there's something more, and so that can go all sorts of places.
Okay. If you don't mind, I wanted to give, I think this is maybe a good point to mention these stats. And I mean, one of the things I'm interested in gay men, in studies dealing with gay men, is the higher rates of mental illness in gay men. This particular stat I found interesting because it's refers to my hometown in San Francisco. It says HIV prevalence among transgender women in the United States is 21%. Among transgender women in San Francisco, it's almost 40%, which is shocking. Almost, approximately 41% of transgender people have attempted suicide at least once in their lives, and that's compared to 5% in the general population. Okay, another study found that transgender individuals were 6 times more likely to have a mood or anxiety disorder than the general population, 3 times as likely to be prescribed antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications, more than 6 times as likely to attempt suicide, resulting in hospitalization. 58% had at least one psychiatric diagnosis compared to 13.6% in the general population.
So, when I hear these stats, which are utterly tragic, and I think that because our whole world has become too scared to say that maybe there are other things going on, they're scared to say that. It's literally costing people their lives.
Right.
And that's heartbreaking.
This is the boom stat, I call it. Now there's a similar one in terms of gay men where 42% of gay men were sexually molested as children by men, compared to 7% of straight men. Huge difference. Now, in the transgender community, 55% reported experiencing an unwanted sexual event before the age of 18, with the average age of initial sexual contact being age 13. So 55, under 18, that's a minor. 55% of people who identify as transgender were molested.
You know what I wish that the conversation would eventually evolve to one day, Joseph, is that people would collectively point the conversation towards trauma and means of trauma recovery, because nobody comes out on the other side of those experiences the same person.
No.
I mean, I was molested by a man, and I was already a teenager by then, and that messed me up pretty good, and what would happen if that was, when I was like 6, or God knows what. And I of course, I know people would come back at that stat and say, well, you're saying that everybody is a molester. It's not, I know that's not what you're saying, but there are statistics that are, let's say, so profoundly disproportionate that it does a disservice to ignore them. Because why does it do a disservice? Because the people on the other end, they could be going through things, that they would do well to at least talk to somebody about. You know what I mean?
This is the same issue that I have in the gay male community, because it's not quite as high, the rate of molestation, but it's very close. So it's a fact that children who are molested, not all of them, but later will have a higher propensity towards mental illness, specifically, PTSD. Go ahead.
Joseph, what about a child who's molested, who then next week goes and molests some other kid because they're repeating something that's been done to them? Yeah. And they're trying to make sense of it, and they don't have someone to talk to, and the parents haven't, there's no way to know, right? And then so you have that happening.
Right.
And
And here, yeah, and here's the problem too. And I can't speak specifically for the transgender issue, but I know it's a lot of times for the gay community. So you have a community where a large number of them have been sexually molested. Um, there's a later onset of mental illness. Now, what a lot of people in the mental health field have done, not everyone, but a lot, I would say the vast majority, they have focused on the identity, the gay identity, saying that the higher rates of mental illness are because of something called minority stress, discrimination against you. They won't go back further to the molestation because you know why? Because that would blow up the born gay theory.
yeah,
And
I
I would say there's a corollary in the transgenderism because we've got a community that's where over half have been molested. Now, what a lot of mental health professionals will point at, because I've read the studies, because they can't deny these much higher rates of mental illness amongst transgender people. And the reason that they give for this disparity is minority stress, but they won't address the molestation issue.
you know what, I want to say one thing about all this. When I was in the thick of things on this, and I was running, and by the way, my whole transgender pursuit, everything about it was complete escapism for me. Like no amount of affirmation in the world would have ever like taken away the interior anxieties that I was uncomfortable with myself, you know? And like the idea of saying like, well, it's your fault that I'm suicidal. I'm sorry. Like that's a really delicate and dangerous thing because we don't accept that. We don't accept the idea that our happiness should come because of other people modifying their behaviors towards us. We don't accept that in other facets of our human experience. But here, that's the essential thing that's pointed to. It's like some people are just going to disagree.
Right.
That's the way it is. Or they're going to believe different things. Gosh, I used to teach in an Islamic school. There's different beliefs out there. And you can't make the whole world side with you before you'll be happy. I couldn't. And for as long as I was in that state, the turmoil inside was always there. And so I just don't see like I was like, what is the end game? It's like we're just saying that if people just finally just supported everybody, then all this would go away. You know, isn't there like, I mean, what about the most pro supportive locations in cities? What are their stats like? Aren't they?
Yeah, I've done that. Yeah. Specifically I'm gonna go to another study, but specifically with gay men in the Scandinavian countries, which have the longest history of LGBT affirmation. I mean, they were the first to allow same-sex marriage, gay adoptions, sex affirmation surgery, all that stuff. And even there, and even among men who are in a same-sex marriage, those mental illness disparities among straight people still exist. Okay. Now, this is another, I want to talk about this. This is a study in Sweden. Again, the Scandinavian countries have the longest history of LGBT affirmation. So overall, the mortality rate for sex reassigned persons, so these are persons who have had a sex change, a sex reassignment, sex affirmation surgery. The overall mortality rate for sex reassigned persons was higher during follow-up than for cisgendered, particularly death from suicide. Sex reassigned persons also had an increased risk for suicide attempts and psychiatric inpatient care.
You know, it reminds me of a study I heard about. I'm sure it's out there, but basically a heightened suicide rate on women who've had breast augmentation surgery, apparently it was found, it was just, this correlation was discovered by accident when they were looking for breast cancer connections. And like, wait a second, all these people, these ladies are experiencing, well, they're committing suicide. And it just makes a person wonder, like, well, what if a person does all these things and then they're like, well, that didn't work, you know? Yeah. Again, for me, like, I remember like Google searching about getting surgeries. I really do. I was in my mid-20s, early mid-20s by then. And I don't even know if Google was around. Maybe it was like Yahoo or some other search engine, Netscape. And I just remember like if I would have done that, I can see now that wouldn't have fixed what was in here, you know?
No. And I don't want to discount what psychiatrists and psychologists call minority stress, because I mean, I was sadistically teased as a boy, and I would say it did make me borderline suicidal. But there were also other issues that I would say happened before the teasing that I wouldn't say caused, but contributed to me feeling and being alienated from other boys.
That's a great point. I think that minority stress can't be ignored.
No.
I think it makes me wonder about like what are the contributing factors to make a young person feel like I have no hope outside of this, you know? Like, I really came to know Jesus in my mid-20s, like midway through. And that's when there began to have like hope for a better tomorrow, you know? Gosh, even a better today. I didn't know. It wasn't like what came out of that was that learning that like, and through really encountering him, is that I was lovable and worthy of being loved. And there was a peace that was accessible, that I craved, that I wasn't getting from the world or down the transgender pursuits or the cross-dressing or the same-sex sexual fantasies. It wasn't there. The peace came from Christ, you know? So our young people who are like virtually deprived of encountering the peace of Christ because you can't talk anything, you know what I mean? The way things are going. What else do they have? Who's all the people that are preventing them from getting to know Jesus and the joy, especially, I'm going to say the C word, chastity, the joy of pursuing a heart of chastity. There's a lot of Catholics who are getting in the way of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
A few.
A few.
Yeah.
1,000 followers online, so they have some reach, but they're preventing people from finding hope, you know? And so as a child, like, I can imagine that in minority stress, where is your hope if that's your world, you know?
Well, what concerns me too about young people with the transgender issue is that we have very young people being prescribed hormones.
You know what else we have though, Joseph? We have very young people who are walking away from LGBTQ, like that. Just as transgenderism is explosive and LGBT, the whole everything is just going wild. The people who walked away is an exponentially increasing number too. Yeah. And so that's an inevitable thing. Is that people have been there, done that, got the surgeries, taken the hormones, had their voices changed forever, and are having their testimonies deleted off of YouTube, which happened again today. I saw someone that's like, or Facebook, because it doesn't fit the narrative. But these kids are walking away, you know, and they're walking away because of some radical encounter with Jesus.
Now, has that been labeled as detransition? Is that the correct?
The common parlance, you would say, yeah, the detransitioners or something like that. Like if you YouTube search detransition story, you'll find probably lots.
Okay. But that's concerning because, I mean, one thing is that if you identify as transgender is one thing, and then later you can have a change of heart. But if you've gone through some sort of medical procedure or hormone replacement, that's that's really irreversible.
Yeah. And so what I wonder about is like, how is the media going to treat these young people who are like celebrity stars, like, you know, what is it, I Am Jazz and all that kind of stuff?
Um,
What happens, let's say, if Jazz has a change of heart? Where's the media going to be then?
I don't
Or,
know.
you know what I mean? I mean, I can guess that they'll be nowhere, you know, because, and just discard it. That's a whole a human life that's impacted forever, and the media push. You know, actually, I even think of like, even let's say someone who's become a YouTube personality or something like that. Think of the affirmation that's coming through that pipeline. You know, it's hard to walk away from that.
But you
It's
know what? Yeah. No, sorry. You know what's interesting because I did some research on YouTube, and there was one YouTuber. I don't know if you're familiar with her, Blair White. Do you know who I'm
Yep.
talking about? Yeah. Um, I mean, she identifies as female, and she looks female.
She looks
But she
female.
had some very, very interesting videos in terms of like gender reassignment surgery, where she had done a lot of research into it. And she's very honest. She's a free thinker, and she doesn't go along, I would say, with the LGBT agenda. So it's interesting that there are independent voices, I guess, within that.
That's true. That's true. I remember, I don't remember her or another person of that, you know, what YouTube caliber, how many hundreds of thousands of subscribers she has,
A
but
lot,
saying I would support detransitioners.
right?
That's not something that the movement of our day does, but a lot of people, you know, she identifies as transgender, or you know, she supports it. So there are voices that are outside of, you know, what would what we would expect, you know. So it's interesting to just to hear those kinds of perspectives. Uh, I remember one time, like, I think it was either her or someone else who they gave voice to someone who had detransition and actually did like an interview. Like that's wild. Like, don't expect that to be part of the school curriculum. You know what I mean? Giving voice to people who detransitioned.
Well,
It's
do you think, and I don't mean to make light of this, but I mean, because I have tattoos, and I just think in the future there are going to be a lot of people that will regret getting a tattoo. And now there's a whole industry that's evolved around that,
yeah.
having them removed. Then this is completely different. But do you think there'll be a lot of people in the future that will regret having either hormonal or some sort of surgical procedure?
Honestly, Joseph, like if you would have told me 2 years ago that I would know, or I would get to know like hundreds and hundreds firsthand or second degree, you know, of separation of people who have um, what's called detransition, I would have told you you're crazy. But for whatever reason, this is happening, and it's happening fast. And it, you know, the better thing is, it's happening with joy. And so I remember seeing just pictures that there was a bunch of them, of people of that who detransitioned, who got together, or they walked away from LGBTQ in one way or another. And I was like, this is a unity. This is the part that makes my heart burst with joy. This was a unity that was above things like race, man. It was so mixed. And the bond of Christ and being somebody who has walked together, not to, of course, not to play down the tragedy of what is going on, but God is unifying this, let's say, an army of people who are going to keep going to God with joy and trying to bring as many people along with them as they can. And it's a group of everybody. And I think our world needs to see that, like people working together, that the media is saying shouldn't be working together, you know?
But are those people pretty much as ignored as those of us who walked away from like being homosexual men or being lesbian? Because I mean, we have no venue or platform.
Right, right. They're totally ignored by mainstream, virtually. But I mean, for whatever reason, I mean, God doesn't only work through mainstream media, right? Through
No,
stories, and
no,
it's just, it's kind of like an undercurrent, you know, for now anyway.
right. I want to go to, this is a related topic, but a little bit separate. Now, the title of the series is Finding Our Father. So I wanted to focus on fatherhood, masculinity, and how those affect the LGBT issue. Now, what I've noticed is, especially with transgender children, and then there's this new um, phenomena called drag kids, usually boys. I haven't really seen any girls, but boys who become drag performers. Now, what I have noticed in, you know, my observation of pop culture is that these are usually that these phenomena, the transgender kids and the drag kids, they're associated with a mother. I call them um, what did I? It was based on the movie Gypsy. Transgender stage mothers
Mm.
who are you don't see the father much or at all, but there's always a mother involved in these with these transgender boys and these drag kids. I almost think like it's a form of Munchausen. Do you know that the Munchausen by
Yeah, it's like,
by proxy?
yeah, I'm living out my life through someone else kind of thing, like your
Yes,
child, something like
yes,
that.
yes. So what do you think? I mean, I haven't really read a lot of studies in terms of this. I've seen them with gay men, but
Mm.
in terms of transgenderism and the family, I
Well,
mean, we know that transgender people, the majority of them were sexually molested.
yeah, yeah. Well, okay, well, I'll put it this way. There has to be some proportion of situations that are exactly with that what you said. What is that, Munchausen? There
Yeah,
has to, can't just,
Munchausen by proxy.
that can't just be magically excluded from the equation of 100% of cases. So I would be interested in knowing, um, what proportion of life dynamics include that. Um, but I'd also be more interested in knowing, um, would our world be too afraid to talk about that? But I guess because of the silence on it already, I already have the answer to that. You know, there's
I
like
mean,
the
but
failure in bigger pictures.
yeah, but through your, I guess it'd just be anecdotal, but through your observations and experiences, have you noticed that, I mean, specifically trans women, their relationship with their mother as compared to their father?
Um, I actually don't have much firsthand knowledge about that dynamic between the person and their parent.
Okay.
So I can't speak to that, but I can speak to the idea, the human idea, that kids desire to be affirmed.
Mm.
And if the affirmation is missing here, the kid will go over there and find it elsewhere. And so wherever, you know, if there's a lot of affirmation in one direction, that might point to the idea that there was a lack of affirmation in the other, namely, let's say, growing into being in the ways of fatherliness or masculinity. You know what I
But
mean?
yeah, but I wonder with specifically children, how much of this is coming from the child and how much of it is with the parent? I mean, because I think initially there might be an incidence of something that looks transgender, where maybe like a boy. I mean, and this is a story with a lot of gay men, where will dress up like a girl, like will get into his mom's clothing or something. And then that can just run wild because a parent might hook
Well,
onto it.
right there. That the parent hooks onto it, that is not of zero effect. That's the safest way I can say it. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
it could anything. You know, the little girls playing with the little green soldiers, or the boys playing with the doll. If the parent
right.
decides to run with this, then
Uh,
how much of this has to do with like the child versus
I don't know.
the desire of the parent to run with something to fulfill some of one of their own desires of whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. So that's what bothers me most about the transgender issue is minors who are going through some sort of hormonal or surgical, augmentation. It's different for an adult, and if for an adult who has all the information, but when you have a child, that bothers me a lot.
Man, check it out. When I was a teenager, a young teenager, some girl told me that because um, someone said is like you have such long eyelashes, you'd make a really great girl,
Oh
right?
boy.
Now at this time, I was already like trying to figure out who I was.
You don't want to hear that, no.
I did not need to hear that, right? But how many women out there would say something like that without even thinking of the crazy effect it could have on a kid's psyche who's just trying to figure out where he belongs? Maybe she's right. Yeah, all these other things that are happening in my life, maybe she's right. Maybe this is what I'm supposed to be doing, you know?
Have you ever thought, because I have thought about this, because like I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and it was, especially in the 80s, it was not cool to be gay, because especially a gay man, because this was the AIDS epidemic. People
Yeah.
didn't people didn't want to shake the hand of a gay man. It was just it was not like today. So, and I came out like the worst possible time, which was 89, the height of the AIDS epidemic. So, and I wonder sometimes about if I had come of age or come out now, how my life would have been so different. I think it would have been, because when I do outreach in San Francisco, at the gay events, I meet young people, and I see a lot of them as a lot like me when I was that age. But there's a difference. They're much more sexually adventurous. They're much more sexually experienced, and they're also consequently they've had a lot of STDs, which I had, but not to the degree that they have. So have you ever wondered like what would have happened to you where this transgenderism is so much more
Yeah.
accepted, and as a boy that might believe that they're transgender,
Yeah,
what would have happened to you?
I shudder to think about it, because at the time when I was younger, especially, I know that like if someone would have like taken me by the hand and like allowed me to explore that, I would have been really happy, because I would have finally like felt like I was able to explore who I was outside of the box of being a boy, which I felt like within which I felt like a complete failure. It was a chance for me to feel like not a failure. And so to be given an open door to like explore that would have been something I longed for it. I remembered it, that I would have been really happy to receive that. But now, having not gone down those roads, I'm very glad that I didn't go down those roads,
Right.
because I know that I can't outrun nature. I can't outrun nature, and I don't want to. I'm out of gas from running already. If I was out of gas from running because I was involved in so many sexual pursuits and whatnot, a lot of times trying to prove that I was straight and stuff, but I was tired. And I was like, if I can't outrun like the misery of feeling empty from not wanting to face myself and the bad decisions I've made in my life. I knew I couldn't outrun that forever, and then I certainly knew I couldn't outrun God,
Yeah.
and how He's authored me to be. So I'm really glad, retrospectively, But at the time, I know I would have been very happy. And who knows where I would have ended up, you know?
So like if you would have been born a generation later and you had talked to a counselor when you were a young man and talked about being transgender, and they would maybe could see making it happen. I
Yeah.
mean, is that as something you would have done?
Like when I was little, or like, yeah, like in that mindset of being in that mindset when I was younger, it would have been green light all the way.
Wow. Okay.
But like I said, here I am now, having not gone down the roads like kids certainly are today. And I'm very glad that I didn't.
So that makes me wonder about how many young people are going to regret it later.
Obviously, we can't put a number on it, but the answer has to be lots. There
Yeah.
already are lots.
Okay. Okay.
Like, I
So
don't know what portion that is, but it's, you know, sometimes they say one is too many.
okay. Now I have a question. It's a more personal question. If you don't want to answer it, don't. Did you reach a point? Well, I would no. I know you did, but when did you reach a point when you said, "Okay, I'm not a woman trapped in a man's body. I'm not some sort of failed man. I'm a man made in the image and likeness of God." When did you come to that point?
So the idea of like, okay, I'm not a woman, we're talking like that came early, you know? And then it was trying to like emulate or be passable, you know, in a very secret life. Um, and that was a fantasy of escapism. And all the time, and then I was able to bring that to a close. But what happened with it, like for example, like the pursuits to be transgender, those things I found they waned, they decreased, but I didn't notice it until long after that they were gone, you know? And I'm like, oh, wait a second, like I don't feel the draw to like totally throw myself into my feminine identity anymore, or the feminine identity that I had created for myself. I didn't feel that draw anymore.
But
And
what brought you there? What was it?
this is the cool thing, is that I it's like I began to practice some self-control, first of all, because I had no self-control when it came to like exploring sexually on myself in particular, right from age 9, right? So I began to practice some self-control, not just in behavior, but also in thought, you know, it's tried to like not as much nurture the thoughts that I had that were lustful, you know? And of course, remember that gay activist who said, you know, environment plays a factor in the development of our attractions. There's the brain environment, the neurological environment, the cocktail of chemicals that we pump out in our brain based on the decisions we make.
Right.
And so in pursuing that, I began to gain confidence in myself a bit, because I actually was able to have some self-control, which is great. And as my confidence, as my self-control went up, and I was really striving to practice the virtue of chastity before I actually knew what chastity was at this point. And so the desire to act out lustfully or to entertain lustful thoughts decreased. And so I realized a lot of the stuff was connected to lustful thoughts.
Sorry to interrupt you. Why?
Hang on. There's one more part to
this. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Confidence went up, and the short story of that is that I felt more confident to be among other guys. And as I became around other guys, I learned the ways of men in a healthier way, because at this point I was back into healthier groups, people pursuing holiness and prayer. And I became less afraid of being a man. And what, instead of just pulling out like bad things out of the garden, this process allowed me to plant beautiful, good things in the garden of what it meant to be a man. And so I was no longer repelled of manhood. And I can see it very clearly. And then it finally entered into, like, I was able to develop healthy friendships with guys in ways that I never could before. And that's when I noticed, like, wow, I haven't had this draw to throw myself into this feminine, persona that I had developed. It was like, yeah, it's because I actually feel like I belong with men now.
Okay. Why? That makes total sense. And my story is similar. But why did you initially, because you talked about you had self-control, but what initially was the impetus for you having self-control? Was it just like, I think these transgender fantasies, or I don't know,
Mhm.
whatever, are like, they're not good for me? What was it that
to, to,
said,
to turn me around in terms of like indulging in passions of the flesh, I'll say, I was probably like early mid 20s ish, like the timeline's messed, but I knew that I was so burnt out from sexual pursuits and the dating world, the secular dating world, which 20 years ago, like a handshake has now turned into like sex. You know what I mean? Like the
oh
bar
yeah,
has for what people do. And I was just so exhausted from that and never being fulfilled. And so I knew that if I was to continue indulging in this, and I knew that every time I escaped into transgender fantasies about entering into that, it was completely related to sexual like release and masturbation every time, you know. Eventually it would wind up there every time. And I was like, I'm not happy doing this in this anymore. You know, I want out. I wanted out. And so that's when I had begun to become exposed to like other ideas, like maybe if I didn't, you know, hang out at the same places that I was, maybe if I was with people that supported me in ways of not sleeping around, you know, like, and I had to work to build rebuild.
it wasn't fulfilling.
It wasn't fulfilling, no. But you know,
Yeah,
but it was when you're in the throes of the madness,
of course.
you're happy because you're escaping looking in the mirror.
But it's very temporary.
It's temporary. It always runs out, and then you got to find someone else to get wrapped up in, so you escape yourself again.
See, this is the story with myself, and I think other gay men that I know who have left the gay male community, is that, they have tried it, and it's unfulfilling, and they're just tired of it, and they want something else. And a lot of times they're desperate. And that's what will lead people a lot of times towards religion.
Yeah. Well, and for me, I think I was very blessed. I actually was like thrown into a situation where there really was nothing else to do but go to church. I had moved up north to a small town where there was like a bar and a church, so I went to both. But I still got some church time in, right? You know.
Now, you were born and raised Catholic. Did you ever like leave the church where you didn't practice and you didn't believe?
Um, I
Because
I left.
I did both.
I left, but I never like renounced it. But I left because of like work. You know, I was working on Sundays, so that was the beginning when I was 13.
So it
And
wasn't
then,
deliberate. It wasn't something you deliberately did, like, I'm gonna
but
leave.
but then I got wrapped up. And that's a story for another time. I got wrapped up in things like new agey stuff,
Yeah.
and I began to like, oh yeah, well this church thing's stupid. Like I come here an hour a week. Like I'm not learning anything. Clearly, like there's more to the universe than what I see in this hour a week. So clearly, the answer to my quest for truth has to be found outside of the church. And so I dove headfirst into things like New Age, and that was some really weird stuff that went on a spiritual level. Short story. Oh man, I was prayed over by a Catholic priest when I thought I was gonna like use these powers and like Reiki and stuff in the church, like a lot of people try to do,
Uh,
and they're allowed to, sadly. But he prayed over me, and at the invocation of the Holy Trinity, you know, in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and whatever he prayed over me, all of whatever I could do, whatever it was completely wiped out. And I was like, okay, clearly, I if I had just begun to like, I went to the Catholic priest because I had already begun to like reconnect to my faith and my upbringing a bit. But I was like, I just cannot do both at the same time. If it's not compatible with the Holy Trinity and the prayers of a priest, then maybe it's not what I should be involved in. You know what I mean?
yeah. Did you ever feel oppressed or discriminated against by, the Catholic Church?
Uh, Hang on a
Because,
sec. I got to answer one question or bring up one other point.
okay, go
In
ahead.
inside the era of being new agey for me, there
Yeah,
was one thing that came up, and that
yeah.
was the belief that if something felt right, it was right.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was the mantra
Oh
of the whole
sure.
operation.
Do what thy will.
Oh yeah, yeah. Anyway, so did I ever feel what discriminated against by the
Yeah,
Catholic?
like I mean, because that's something that's sort of a false meme that we hear a lot from LGBT Catholics, that they've been discriminated, oppressed.
The first time that I was ever discriminated against in the Catholic Church was when one woman who works or who worked at the time for the church was trying to dissuade me from sharing my testimony
Oh,
and trying
nice.
to encourage, like in a roundabout sense, and trying to encourage me to go with I'm gay and Catholic and I'm just going to behave nice because I love Jesus kind of thing. And I'm like, you got to be flipping kidding me. This
Yeah,
is oral to tell
yeah.
someone that your narrative, my narrative, should not be allowed to be expressed in the Catholic Church or in our Catholic colleges. Who anyway, the point is that that was the only time. It's never come from on account of me experiencing same-sex attractions. It has come precisely through the realm of people saying, we don't want you to talk about chastity and how you have found freedom. And that is just like,
No, I believe that. And my experience in the Catholic Church at the time, as being, a young man who identified as gay, was not at all discriminatory. It was very affirming. So so essentially, why I left the church is that it just really didn't offer anything that the gay male community offered in a more lively, interesting way. You know, I didn't want to hang out with a middle-aged priest who wore a rainbow stole. It just was, and played the guitar and, sang the St. Louis Jesuits. It just was bad. Yeah, it was just bad folk, um, pastoral LGBT queer theology, and it was not interesting to me at all. So, like I said, that I could find all the affirmation I wanted in the gay male community in a much more, intriguing environment. So that's why I left the church. Since we're talking about the church, real quick, I want to talk about, and I want to get your opinion on this. Um, the Los Angeles Religious Education Congress, in LA. It's referred to the LA Rec by some of us. It is the largest gathering of Catholics in the United States, like 60, 70,000. Although I've heard the numbers are dropping, which is great news. So I've gone every year, and they always have LGBT sessions. So this is attended, but it's also attended by people from throughout the United States, but also throughout the world, the English-speaking world. So you have a lot of catechists there, DREs, priests, Catholic educators there. And for the most part, they are required to go. It's mandatory.
mhm.
So I have gone for years. I've gone to the LGBT sessions, the courses. And I mean, for instance, just to give you an idea of where their headspace is. James Martin is always the headliner for that. And I've gone to the trans. They've had actual transgender sessions, and they had, for 1 year, they had a transgender man, so someone that had transitioned from female to male, and they gave their testimony, but all from a very positive, pro transgender, pro transgender reaffirmation surgery, very positive in terms of that. And then they had, of course, a mother of a transgender child. They didn't talk anything about this stuff. It's all about how you should love, affirm a child who, as young as the second and third grade, in an LGBT identity, and this is coming from the Catholic Church.
It's coming from the people of the LA Rec, but not the catechism, right?
No, but I mean, these are representatives at the highest level of the Catholic Church. I mean, LA is a cardinal see. This is the largest catechetical gathering in the United States. This is not something weird that's going on at a gay
Oh, I
parish.
understand.
It's in, San Francisco or whatever. This is very prestigious. And this is the type, and it was absolutely shocking to me. I mean, I know that the people in the church have been promoting homosexuality since the 70s, at least. But when I started hearing them talk about affirming a child who's in the second or third grade as transgender, and what scares me about it too, and this is why the LGBT community is what it is, but it's largely secular. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's even largely irreligious. I mean, I've been in that community, and I still outreach there. They don't tend to mix God in with this. You're born gay, you're born that way, and all that stuff. That's okay. That's what they're doing. What I really dislike, and what I think is really evil about what some people do in the Catholic Church, is they're bringing God into the mix, which is saying you're born gay or you were born transgender and God made you that way and God willed it and God blessed you that way. That bugs me when they do that. That's really sick. Feel free to comment. That was my editorial.
That's all right. It what I would what I would try to do to for anybody who might be thinking of attending and saying, "Oh, this is amazing, is just to like propose the idea to say, are they pointing people to refer to the catechism as the authority on faith and morals? And it would be very easy to see that they're not. For example, I mean, there's several things. I forget the verse number for the catechism on chastity, but we know that chastity includes successful integration. And that definition can't be understood unless someone's looking at nature through the lens of the Catholic Church, which has to do with what God has authored into humanity and not countering what God has authored into humanity, like biologically and in how we are created. It's not just about what feels like, but the other thing is,
can I play devil's advocate real quick? Okay.
This one, Catechism.
Go ahead.
1849 talks about sin, and this is the thing: sin is a rejection of truth. I mean, that's not word for word, but truth. And this is what really bothers me in any context when Catholics are comfortable with the idea of sin being some kind of thing that is 100% apart from being able to describe it in some concrete standard. To reject truth is to sin. Now, the truth of how we are authored. Now, someone would say, well, I'm authored as trans. Okay, but we're also authored as, oh, this is where I could lose my life for this.
Male and female.
When aliens come to planet Earth to take two people to repopulate another planet, they're taking a male and a female. There, I said it. Okay? That's part of what's the authorship.
Shame on you.
That's the authorship. And that's and to ignore that I am a male, or that my complement is a female, that's a rejection of successful integration. It's a rejection of truth. But when people say the truth is only like connected to your desires, or truth is connected to only missing the mark, or missing the mark according to what? Well, your desires. You got lots of problems. And I see this everywhere. People don't want to point towards the catechism to be the source of wisdom greater than themselves. And people cannot see sin, or they're not seeing, being able to look at sin according to some concrete standard, which it is in some terms when we're countering what God has authored into creation.
Yeah.
So the comments on the LA Rec, because
it's not just them though. It's not just them.
It's not just them.
No,
course
there
not.
was, yeah, there was an LGBT Catholic ministry in New York City that, because sometimes I read, their social media sites. They had actually recommended a certain group of physicians, surgeons, for people who were seeking out, gender affirmation, reassignment surgery. So it goes that far. And
And
this
it
is
goes
under this is
farther.
under the auspices and the guise of the Catholic Church.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it goes much farther than that on the things that aren't posted.
Right. Oh, wow. Yeah, you're right. So I just wanted to play devil's advocate real quick because you talked about the catechism. Now, the catechism does mention homosexuality, it does not mention transgenderism. And I've talked with LGBT advocates in the Catholic Church, and they bring that up. And they
Yeah.
say, well, the Catholic Church has not made, a really definitive statement on the transgender.
Joseph, it all comes down to chastity and understanding successful integration. For me to deny or to reject my maleness, or for a female to reject their femaleness, is a rejection of successful integration of the sexual aspects of my being that God has written into existence. So it's a rejection of chastity to take on a transgender mindset, to pursue that.
Right. Hudson, is there anything that you see as hopeful in terms of the transgender issue, young people, let's say, and the Catholic Church? Anything?
Well, with all the, man, that's a tough one. With all the laws are being passed to basically make it harder and harder to provide a narrative outside of what the world is saying right now. So maybe the idea that something is being suppressed, if that was known, maybe young people would think that's unjust, So maybe there's a chance for that. But I mean, we have, even despite all the insanity going on in the world, we have every hope to, because of the life, death, resurrection of Christ. Truly, that's what it comes down to for me. And what brought me a lot of hope, actually, was learning that suffering can be transformed to be an offering of penance. And this is kind of off topic, but that is a gift we can give to humanity. So even if things go really bad, we can turn that to the good. And so even, so what's happening in the world, it is what it is. Hey, we're born for this time, but I mean, I'm staying focused on God, and I know that that's where the joy is. So I got hope, and I want to relay that hope to others somehow.
Yeah, one inconsistency, and I'll wrap this up in just a couple of minutes. One inconsistency I see in some of the LGBT theories is that, and I'm somebody that's had 20 years of psychotherapy, it's okay to change your gender, but it's not okay to change your sexual orientation.
Or
To
your
me,
attraction.
that's completely inconsistent.
Yeah, but check this out. What it's like, if people are, when contradictory positions are able to be had with no like rupture in thought, we ought to be looking at what is the spirit that resides in that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Another, on that note, like for example, like someone saying with like abortion, my body, my choice, right? And then it's like, well, what about my body and the choice for me to go and pursue a conversation with a counselor about unwanted same-sex attraction?
Can do it.
I remember having a conversation with someone about this recently, and I said, what about my body, my choice for someone like me? And then the answer was like, why do I feel like I'm being attacked? It's like, I'm just trying to propose an idea, that there's a double standard. But from my experience, which is, with several people, is that people don't want to think about or that it's contradictory, or they could just accept the contradiction. It's crazy. It's crazy that they accept the contradiction, is what I'm saying,
I'm going to go back to that stat of 55% of people who identify as transgender were molested. In my experience, when you've gone through a trauma, you tend to go into a fantasy world, especially as a child, because that's just a safe place to be. And what I see in the world as it gets more chaotic, people are delving more and more into fantasy, and it's getting deeper and deeper with online porn, gaming, whatever.
Yeah, I see that makes sense to me. Yeah, I don't think it's good. I think it's. I'll put it this way: like if some gigantic army was marching over the hillside, they would mop the floor with us because we're all too busy in our fantasy lands.
Yeah. And you know, one thing that the LGBT community, and I hate that acronym because a lot there's so many different aspects of the human experience in that, and they're so different. But one thing I think that, let's just say, the gay male community offers is a sense of community and belonging in a world that seems a little out of control. So I can see why a young person would would gravitate towards it.
Yeah, me too. I can see that, and I've lived that, the sense of wow, I can belong here, and truthfully, like that pursuit of belonging, which is a human thing, that's powerful stuff.
Okay.
You know?
What what this is going to be one of just our final discussion. What I say to guys um, who believe that they're gay, involved in the gay community, identify as gay. What I ask them to do is just be open to options and to explore some deeper aspects of themselves that go beyond sexuality, and to look at perhaps why they feel they're gay, and when they feel that started. What would you say to somebody that thinks identifies as transgender? I mean, what would you say to them? What do you think they should do or think about, or at least be open to?
And Joseph, honestly,
Hey,
I
that's a
think
big question.
the first thing I would need to do is just listen, and not listen with like the idea to fix or something like that. That's crazy. I just want to listen and get to know someone. Truly, that's what I want to do.
What about to a parent that has a child that they might think is transgender, specifically um, a young boy? What about the dad? What should he do?
This came up just today before we started chatting, um, and I think the answer is to strive to love more. Now, what that looks like, I mean, I'm not in that relational dynamic. You know what I'm saying? I don't know how things go in that household. But what could loving more look like? While realizing that it is not loving to usher someone down in ways that reject truth and or reject growing in the fullness of virtue. So, and of course, things are different too. What if the child is 30 years old versus 6 years old? That's going to be different, you know? So the idea is like every parent has to stand for something. Otherwise, they really stand for nothing. So that's a big principle. And a lot of times when I talk to parents who are usually pretty distraught, otherwise they wouldn't be interested in seeing other ideas, we just talk about how God can use their suffering. This is a big thing. God can use the suffering that's on their heart for the conversion of the heart of their child.
Yes.
And in doing that, they give their child, as one lady says, I gave my baby girl back to Jesus. And you know what that did? Sure, God worked with that girl, but you know what it did for the parent? It set the parent free. and the parent was able to move on from the sorrow and into joy again in a whole new level of trust of Jesus. And she's inspired me and so many people just with her joy, because her level of trust by handing her daughter into the hands of Jesus. That's what I want parents to be able to do, so that, like, the devil wants them to be miserable, but we don't have to fall into that trap.
What about specifically, I'm just thinking of this question too, because I get it a lot from Catholic parents. How do you stay on the line between loving your child but not affirming them in something that they don't feel is healthy for them?
Two points I would consider there is, like, maybe the parent could imagine, what if this was a different case, like a different context? What if my child was doing something else that was, that I didn't enjoy? How would I handle them in that respect? The other question is to look at, now, of course, depending on the ages and stuff, is to what degree am I complicit in this? Like the person who runs a napkin factory supplies napkins, and some of the weddings are same-sex weddings. Well, what's a napkin factory owner going to do? He doesn't. It's absolutely zero impact.
Nothing.
The choices that people are making and how they are choosing to live. So, to what degree is someone complicit?
But that takes a lot of humility, and it takes a lot of a willingness to look at yourself to do that. And a lot of parents don't want to do that, and that's why, like someone like this is why someone like a James Martin is so popular, because I think he gives people the way out, which is,
I think it affirms
you
a lot
had
of.
you had nothing to do with it. It was just the way that God made them.
Yeah, it's kind of a cheap office. It's, well, the question, is it pointing people towards growing in the fullness of virtue, tasting the joy of chastity, and desiring to bring that joy to others? Not usually.
No. And just as a final point too, I would reemphasize what you said about redemptive suffering, because I know, in particular with my father, may he rest in peace, is that my dad prayed for me, throughout, my self-exile in the gay male community. And I was not even aware of it. And if I had been aware of it, I wouldn't have thought anything about it. So I do know that those prayers are very efficacious.
Yeah.
So
the prayers and the sacrifice are good, and we have to trust that the Lord will use it in the way that He sees fit, not how we see fit.
Right.
Well, we still can ask for some things in our prayers, of course, but it's ultimately up to Him and our trust in Him.
Thank you, Hudson. God bless you. Thank you for joining me.
It's been awesome to see you again, Joseph. Thanks so much for having me.
You too. God bless you.